Hello and welcome to Jung at Harp, episode 102. Today we're going to be talking about unlocking expectations in the golden cage. So we're actually combining.
Hello and
Oh, right.
welcome to Jung at
I
Harp,
forgot that
episode
this.
10.
Okay, you know what? I'm going to start this again. Hello, and welcome to Jung at Harp, episode 102. Today, we're going to be talking about unlocking expectations in The Golden Cage. So, The Golden Cage is the musical that I've been working on for many years. It is now about to come out on the Streaming Musicals Network, and we're unlocking the themes inside of this story. So, let me just briefly tell this story so that you know that this story is about a bird person, a human that can fly, so has the capabilities of flying, but is a human, who's been searching his whole life for this mythical golden cage, which is the ultimate place of security. He finally finds it. It's everything he ever dreamt of, except for one thing. There is someone trapped inside the cage. And this person is a grumpy, melodramatic diva who says that the cage is not golden at all. It is a prison of cement and iron. So the story is all around that theme, and the themes are this person who's been ambitiously looking for this thing all his life, and then this person who is locked inside of this golden amazing thing. Now you'll have to come see the story to find out what happens after that, but the themes, we're looking at these themes because they play out in life. And Kathleen, you were looking at one that I'm really interested in hearing about.
Yeah, as we were talking, getting ready to go live, we were sharing about our week. And one of the things I'm in the process of doing is sending out queries in a book proposal for the book that looks at the embodiment practices and processes that I cover in my online circles. And I'm getting lots of no's. and it's really very I'm sure some of you listening have gotten no's before. I don't even need to try to explain what that feels like. And so I found myself beginning to ask myself all kinds of questions like, why am I doing this? Is this what I need to be doing? What's the point? Blah, blah, blah. And it occurs to me how often we can have a desire and an expectation of how something's supposed to look. That's the golden cage that both Althea and Boris sought. But that when we get so fixated on that as being the only option and the only thing, it does become the prison of cement and stone. It's like we get bogged down in it. We get caught. We get weighted down. I found myself literally physically this week, after a stream of multiple no's from more than one source, feeling this kind of heavy cement-like feeling. And it does seem to me that part of what this beautiful myth you've written, modern day myth of the golden cage, has to remind us is that when we get tunnel vision and caught in our idea of what we want and lock ourselves into it and keep everything else out, we in fact do get caught in the prison of cement and stone. And the ability to stay open, to come and go out of the cage, out of the expectation, to explore other options is truly integral to staying alive and flying in the sense of living.
It's really interesting because as you're talking and I'm realizing what I was talking about before we came in, which seemed completely unrelated at the time, which was about technology and which was about some frustration. My computer wasn't working, but I was also thinking that yesterday in Harp Time Live, I was playing something very fast, and some of the people were saying that just makes it really hard because then we feel like we can't do it. And I was saying, well, you can do it like this, and they were like, but we don't want to do it like this. We want to do it like that. And I really get it because when we don't have a when we're working with technology and we don't have facility with it, we feel trapped.
Yes. Yeah.
And so I don't know, I don't know how all these things fit together, yet I do, because, well, okay, so I'm thinking, yeah, I feel trapped by a lot of the, like, well, there's a microphone here and there's cables there and there's a blah. and I'm not always sure the microphone is working because blah 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 blah. And I realized, so the and a friend of mine yesterday said, I could help you with that. And I was like, I don't need any help. And I'm realizing that he was reaching in to my cage, and I pushed him out. And I realized that I can actually reach back to him, and that can help me shift out of this particular cage. So I'm realizing as we're talking that, I've always thought of the golden cage as this sort of monolithic thing, this thing you've searched your whole life for, and then you get trapped in it. But now, as we're speaking, I'm beginning to think, oh, it may be a little more nuanced than that, that there's traps
Yes.
all over the place that I'm constantly. And you said something right before we came on about as soon as you close your mind,
Yeah.
then you're trapped inside. Now, you are a Jungian psychoanalyst. I forgot to say anything about that in the beginning of why this is called Jung at Harp. And it's called Jung at Harp because Kathleen is a Jungian psychoanalyst. I'm a composer and a performer. We both are fascinated with structure and structure and art. So with the freedom
Yeah.
of self-expression, but the structure of of a highly structured instrument and the development of our physical capabilities to express ourselves through them.
Yeah, this is such a little side note, but the sacred intention that I've been working with for my own embodiment practices now is symbolized by my being at the harp and just plucking the strings and the resonance that just flows, because it's a structure that allows something to move. And there is something about the structure that is the golden cage, that is that which holds the life force, I'm thinking about the golden sunshine, the essence that holds it in such a way that things can flow freely. And it's such a different image to allow that resonance out than to block it in. The other thing that came to my mind as you were talking is the difference in the play between Althea's response when Boris shows up and his feather floats into her cage. And she has that moment of dreaming and tapping into possibilities. And then her ego takes over and she goes into defense mode, fight. Who's trying to break in? And when the roles are reversed at the end and Boris is trapped in the cage and it's become the stone of cement and prison to him, and Althea shows up. And at that moment, he is more open to her presence than she was in the beginning. And it's almost as if we see a transformation of the attitude that our own ego consciousness goes through on our own journey toward wholeness and living our fullness. Is that in the beginning, when something shows up unexpected, we get real defensive and we want to fight it all. And then after we have a few experiences of getting out of the cage and seeing the possibilities, when that part of us is trapped again, and here comes the rest of us along that Althea symbolizes in my mind at this moment, and says, oh, but Boris, you can come and go. We're more open to it. It's like we have some historical experience of that ability to open our mind. And we recognize, wow, I've closed myself in and I can open. So it's a process that in some ways it gets easier along the way because we have some evidence that this is safe to do. In the beginning, Althea didn't have evidence it was safe.
Right. She'd forgotten all the evidence. That's really interesting because there, so much has just come in my brain right now, including a huge epiphany, which I want to share in a second, about what the cage represents to me. But when Althea comes back, you'll have to see the story. You will be able to see the story soon. And I'm wanting to talk about the concepts beforehand because I want people to be thinking about them outside of the story first and how kind of they fit in your life. So Boris has done something heinous, really worthy of being locked in a cage. And so he's taken on that guilt. And when she does come back, he is locked in his guilt at that point. However, and I never thought about this until just now when you were talking about it, she tells him the story of how she tells him her epiphany, her understanding of the cage. She has gotten an understanding of the cage.
Mhm.
And it's through that story that they're able to start then unraveling what the magic is. And it's making, I've been thinking lately a lot about the power of sharing, what sharing does. Do we have to come up with something amazing before we share it? You know, does it have to be to get 5,000 hits on, you know, blah, blah, blah. Whereas, oh God, that's a whole other thing. Just the act of opening a window rather than getting all dressed up and standing on stage, opening a window to let people in. That she's able to share that story, and that I think I never thought about how impactful that is for him. But the big thing that hit me in what you were saying when you were talking about sitting at your harp. So I started writing this musical when I was 19. I started playing, I went back, I knew that I did not know how to write music out. And I saw that I was writing something really big. And so I said, I put myself back in school to learn how to read and write music.
Mhm.
At that school, they had a harp, and I was drawn to it because it got me out of something else. But then I immediately, very soon realized I could use the harp playing to fund the Golden Cage.
Mhm.
And it never occurred to me until just this moment when you were describing playing the harp and resonating it, when I saw the bars of the Golden Cage and realized that the plucking the bars of that the Golden Cage was a harp in a sense, which is exactly what happened to me in my life. That I ended up playing the harp. The harp took me off on this other adventure, which has been amazing. I never could have had, I never would have met you. I never would have done all the things. I wouldn't have been able to do a tenth of what I've done with my life. And yet all that time, it was taking me away from the Golden Cage, which was the story I came here to tell. And
Oh.
in this moment that you made that embodiment
Mhm.
image or gesture, I saw the connection between the harp and the Golden Cage that I had never seen. I really thought they were completely disconnected.
Oh,
So anyway,
wow.
that was I don't know what that means, but that's part of why I love these conversations, is that they just keep opening things up. And that's part of why I want us to have these conversations publicly, because to me, conversation is where I go to learn things. I can learn things in a class where someone's telling me stuff, but that's not nearly as interesting as going and speaking with somebody who is also searching
Yeah.
and searching together.
Well, and just in those two examples, we've got the difference between someone who has a closed mind with all the answers and someone who has an open mind that's looking and exploring and checking things out. You know, I couldn't help but think about, as you were saying about how the strings of the harp can be like little golden rivers of light that we pluck, or they can feel like these prison bars that I never get the right one. I don't have the
Correct.
right tone. I don't put my feet or whatever. And you know how in Jungian psychology, one of Jung's basic tenets is everything exists with its opposite. Well, actually, Jung wasn't the first to say that. The alchemist said it. I mean, this is ancient spiritual truth that, you know, everything has a light side and a dark side. I mean, when we see it in nature, the sun rises and we have daylight, the sun, you know, sets and we have night and we have dark. And that we have to be able to recognize those polarities and find a way to move between them that's life-giving. And when we don't move between them is when we get trapped, when we get caught in a cement, because one-sidedness is the source of all neurosis, according to Jung, meaning that most of the problems we get bogged down in are because we have a one-sided attitude, or we're identified with one feeling state.
So this is fascinating to me because when I was in the second grade or third grade and I learned about opposites and they were like, boy is the opposite of girl, white is the opposite of black. And I was like, wait a second. Boy is exactly like girl except for one thing. White is exactly like black except for one thing. So the opposite, I mean, like, and I was like, no, a real opposite would be like boy and magnificence, or I mean, like something that was not even a real thing and was not magnificent, but something that I couldn't even, I don't know, like truly the opposite. Like, what is the opposite of a pencil? Like it would be something on another dimension that is the opposite of everything a pencil is. It wouldn't have, but anyway, so that was fun to think about for about 20 years. Um, but so therefore, and was like, okay, if you find an opposite, it's exactly the same except for one thing. And then like gender, it's boy exactly the same as girl except for that. So being able to really interesting being able to float between those two, like float between black and white. Black, depending on whether you're looking at light or color, is the opposite, is the no color, and white is all colors together. And in between them is this incredible spectrum. That's where the spectrum is. So what it's making me think of is when we cast the golden cage, when I created the golden cage, I was, well, at the first of all, I've always had a lifelong commitment that everything I do has to have at least equal characters, female characters to men characters, and not just for what it looks like on the stage, but for the financial aspects of that and everything. That same amount of women are getting as much money as men. Blah 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 blah. Whatever. So when we cast it, it can be cast any age, any gender, any body type. Someone could be probably quadriplegic and do either of the roles. I mean, it doesn't really matter. It's just going to have a different meaning. And I don't know, somehow I thought about that when you were talking about opposites having each other in them, and then thinking of the spectrum between the opposites. And that's where the color is the spectrum between those opposites. Okay, carry on. I just went off
No,
on
but I think you're saying something that's important to remember is the opposites are not in any way disconnected, but they're on a continuum. And there is a principle from that, again, Jung cited, but that dates back to Greek philosophy of enantiodroma that says sooner or later, everything meets its opposite. And, and in Jungian psychology, as well as in esoteric spiritual teaching, the understanding is I may be born into a female body, but I also have masculine energies within my psyche, that it all is contained. There might be one surface appearance, or there might be one nuanced container, but the other energies are there on different levels or different planes. And so recognizing the interconnectedness of all things, which I do think is part of what happens in the golden cage with Boris and Althea. They recognize they are connected. They both were seeking the same thing.
Right.
At the end, we found out Althea ended up in the
golden
golden
cage. Don't tell
cage.
anybody. No.
She ended up locked in just in the same way Boris ended up locked in. I mean, that their stories, and this is, again, is the power of story, is we find out how similar we are when we share our stories. That maybe on the surface, where we've lived, the nuances of our family system, what we study is different, but the underlying drives and desires and emotional things that we feel are common to all human beings.
I'm having another massive epiphany. Wow, because I'm realizing, as I don't even know if I can encapsulate it, so I hope it'll come back, but that these two characters in the beginning, they seem like the opposite. They are literally on the opposite sides of something that completely disconnects humans, whether they're flying humans or not flying humans. And by the end, the epiphany is that of Althea is that no, she is like Boris.
Right.
But then but then there's, and so, so what? So I'm like you. Well, what does that mean? If I'm like you, then I can reach in. I mean, if once I see how we are alike, or believe it or whatever, then we can free each other of this polarization or whatever it is. I mean, that's the other thing, is when the whole musical started with one question that I asked myself at 19: is my life going to be a life of freedom or a life of security?
Mhm.
And I just kept asking that over and over again in many ways. And one of the interesting answers I got along the way, which I'm just thinking about now, is I was talking to a friend about it. And again, I was just ask everybody this question. And he said, well, he was trying to figure out what he was doing with his life, and he was going to be with a bunch of different women, or was he going to get married, or what was he going to do? And he said, so is freedom the freedom to like be with as many different women as I want, or is freedom the freedom to be married to one woman and go,
Mhm.
to the depths of with her? And I just always remembered that question again. I don't know, just looking at opposites. I don't even know where we're going with this today. It's just opening up so many. What it's making me think is, I started with that question at 19: is my life a
Mhm.
life of freedom or security? And now I'm beginning to think those are not opposites.
Yeah, what I'm going to say is we have to have enough security to feel free to let down, and we have to have enough freedom that security doesn't become golden handcuffs, that the security is fluid and flexible enough that it allows us to live into our fullness.
And
And and
it's coming to something we talk about all the time.
yeah,
Structure is freedom. There needs to
yeah,
be enough structure, and it's making me think about technology too. I need to know enough or have enough facility to be able to feel free to communicate or be expressive with it.
right. And in terms of living our life and from a perspective of analytical psychology, then the security we have is in being our true self. Is getting to know our larger self and the essence we are, not which is much more than our historical self, much more than our learned patterns and adaptive self. And that's where our security is in being who we are, being true to ourselves. And the journey for most people in terms of their lifelong seeking is to really know who they are and live into their fullness. That can get hijacked by all kinds of seeming golden cages that really are stones of cement in prison. People get caught in the workaholism and addictions and in, feeling trapped in whatever socioeconomic place they're in, or in a relationship or whatever. And so the idea of right limitation, which is another way of saying having enough um, security to be free to explore, and enough freedom to have the security that is fluid and flexible enough for one to live one's true nature, is really important.
Sorry, I was just turning off a thing. So let me ask you
Yeah.
something. Um, this came up yesterday, and where some students were talking about feeling that they were frustrated because they didn't have the technical ability to do something. And I was saying, can you find freedom without that? And
Mhm.
and we it's a really beautiful question. And so I run nearly every day, and I'm not a swift runner in any way. And sometimes I think about what it would feel like, what it might feel if my body were to be able to be swift, and how that would feel. And so I really understand. I connect that with what
Mhm.
they're saying. Like, yeah, I'm playing, but I'm just like, I can't. Um, what can you say? I mean, because you deal with embodiment practices. I know
Right.
we only have like, 4 more minutes, but what would you say to people? Well, like just to me, if I'm running and I want to experience freedom within a body that is seemingly, I guess everybody's body is limited. Um, how would I feel more freedom within, rather than caged?
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with self compassion and acceptance. And, you know, when we reject where we are as less than, as not artistic enough, as not athletic enough, as whatever, then we immediately start cutting ourselves in half. And I know for me, from playing the harp, because I'm an adult learner, it's taken me years. I mean, the first masterclass I had with you, Deborah, was right after. I mean, I hadn't been playing the harp a year when I think I first met you. And you said to me about joining in with my folk musician husband, professional, and friends. Find one chord, listen for that chord, and only do that chord. If it's the one note, if it's the octave. Well, it's taken me years to appreciate the beauty of that and how that adds something. Because in my mind, I thought, well, that's nothing. I want to do what they're doing. And so the problem was the cement of stone in prison was I devalued it. I was the one who blocked it being artistic and free and contributing. They didn't. And so I think so much of it has to do with our own attitude that dismisses, devalues, degrades, criticizes. And I'm going to put a plug in here for a book. It's an old book, but it's been reprinted by Theodore Rubin, Compassion and Self-Hate. There is so much self-hate we engage in. And all of those things I just named are insidious forms of self-hate. And they block us from embodying our fullness. And that includes as the musician we are, it includes as the, analyst I am, the composer you are, the friend, the partner. And that's what I would say is that take 3 deep breaths and really begin to hear those things that are degrading and begin to say no.
Yeah. The other thing that I'm thinking as you're speaking, and I laughed when you said the book because it was one of the first books you ever told me to buy, and it's on my bookshelf by my bed. What I'm realizing is, what would I be experiencing if I could run swiftly as Adonis or whatever? And I realized I would be feeling the breeze in a certain way. And I thought, well, to feel free in the runner that I am, requires to not be constantly assessing what is happening in my body or what I am or not doing, but to actually become more and more aware of those things, like the breeze, like the smell, like, whatever it is. And that is what opens me up to freedom. And it's interesting what you said about those individual notes, and I get that like, no, but I want to run like them. I want to do it like them. And one of the things that really helped me see this in music is there was an amazing player, a guy named Jack Nebergall, who gave me one of my first harp jobs playing with Danny Yale and the Regency Strings. And the harp's job was just to put these little things in little tiny little notes, and they were spectacular. And his ability, I will never forget seeing him listening and just putting one note in and it being turning it, the music from something pedestrian into something magical, this one single note. And that's part of what made me realize that one thing that we put in is that opens up a certain light from a certain window that allows the whole thing to be seen in a new way.
Yes. And I know we've got to stop, but I want to say, and this applies in our life too, that in our relationships with ourselves and with people in the outside world, if we can just say the simplest of things about how we feel when something happens, and it makes a difference. Angeles Arian used to say, wherever we compare or compete, we cut ourselves in half. And our culture so promotes comparing and competing. And if we can take that on today, that will do more to get us out of the cage of our expectations than anything else. Because then I can stop and say, where is it that I'm experiencing the breeze and running? And where do I feel my body just letting go and going with the motion and getting in the zone? That's what matters. Not that you're going fleeting like Adonis, or the wing-footed Hermes god. I mean, it's that being able to be with your own embodied experience of it.
I'm laughing because I'm thinking of the song that Boris uses to open up Althea's mind to the possibility of being free. And the song
Mm,
goes the rhythm, the music, the rapture as you're reeling, that feeling as you sail into the sky, that moment of freedom, the pounding in your head when first you spread your wings and start to fly.
yes. Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
I'm thinking
And
that is the thing that actually unlocks the golden cage.
yes, is that feeling of aliveness. However, whether it's with that one octave that I'm plucking on the harp and feeling it, or it is that moment of running, you know, and that moment of connection, because you said something earlier, and I wanted to just circle back. Jung says that when we can really see each other and all of our projections, putting our ideas of who other people are on them, fall away, what we're left with is kinship libido, which is the need for human connection. And that need for human connection happens where we meet on a feeling level, where we have these shared moments of epiphany together, the shared moments of, wow, I know what it's like to be in the prison of cement and stone. You know what it's like. Our prisons may look different, but it's the resonance we share, and how that is truly what's freeing in our relationships to ourselves and to other people. Oh, I lost the sound.
I can't believe that you said the word kinship.
Mhm.
When I set about to do this project, Unlocking the Golden Cage, I I chose several words sorry, several words to that I wanted to experience through the unlocking of the golden cage. I don't remember all of them, but kinship was one of the words, and it's not a word we hear that
Yeah.
much.
Yeah.
But I just that was so beautiful, Kathleen. Wow. Thank you so much for this conversation. And for anyone
Mm.
who is watching or listening, please come and be part of it, comment on it, go to goldencagemusical.com to be part of this conversation and to be part of the unlocking of this show and then the release of the show in December of 2022 and beyond. And Kathleen, just thank you for this kind of conversation, number 102 of our Jung at Harp conversations. And I can't wait to see you next week again.
Me too.